Hello, and welcome to Bust and Beyond with your host, Robin Hayhurst. In this podcast, Robin will introduce guests that have known failure and want to share their story about how they got through it and what happened next. This will make you learn how to see things from a new perspective and avoid making the same mistakes. Please welcome Robin Hayhurst.
Hello and welcome to Bust and Beyond podcast. I'm Robin Hayhurst and I'm very lucky to be joined today with Janet Nash. Janet is a business coach and mentor for cleaners, so she's a real kind of understands her niche and knows what she's on, which is very similar to myself. Hello Janet and welcome.
Good morning and thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I am going to confess, this is my very first podcast, so be gentle.
Well, it's not my first one, so you're in good hands. You'll be all right. So Janet, you've actually made the national newspapers with part of your story. You're almost famous. But it started with some failure, which is kind of what we're interested in how you got there. So firstly, can you tell me a bit about yourself and kind of your background?
So my background has always been recruitment. Absolutely loved it. And it's a role that you can't do part-time. You need to be in it to win it. I'd worked my way up and held a really successful job as an area manager for a quite a large recruitment agency. And just simply loved it. So yeah, that was how that's been my background. And then I got married quite late in life, if I'm honest with you, and decided that I would focus on bringing up my children. I did want to go back to work, but recruitment wasn't really a job that I could go back to. It didn't work around my family. It's a job where you have to be so focused and it's quite pressurized. So yeah, it didn't work for me.
Right, okay. So what did you do?
So if I'm honest with you, I did quite a lot of charity work. I became chairperson of preschool. I was quite an active fundraiser. As much as I loved being at home with my children, I wanted that people contact. And eventually, my marriage started to go wrong badly. And I realized that I was on shaky ground. I didn't have an income, wasn't sure that I was going to stay married, and realized that I needed to change my situation. So knowing that I couldn't go back into recruitment, I started to think about what I could do and decided that I would open a cleaning business. I'm going to be honest, everybody told me that I was completely crazy, not just because I'd got 2 young children and wanted to go back to work, but because I'd got nothing. I didn't have anything to invest. I could only work certain hours. So yeah, I spent a long time looking at franchising and looking at what other people were doing so I could get some ideas of what I wanted. And I guess I based my business model on my parents who were quite elderly and lived in a small village. And I always thought that if I was going to find them a cleaner, I knew that I would always want to make sure that it was someone I could trust, someone that understood them, etc., etc. So I kind of used that as my yardstick that whoever I employed and however I built my business, if it was going to be good enough for my parents, it would be good enough for everybody else. I needed to make sure that it was always going to be professional. It was going to be done just in the most sensitive way. And that's how I started, really.
You talk about your marriage failing, and obviously, that's very private stuff. But do you feel that in giving up work to raise your children, which is in itself very fulfilling, I understand that perhaps that entrepreneurial drive that you had, the thing that the work was fulfilling, was missing?
Yeah, definitely. I'd come from a really high-powered, it would not be uncommon for me to work 50, 60 hours a week. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I missed that buzz of I'd spent a long time in sales. That was a huge part of my role. And I really missed that sort of hunter role of going out and getting more sales and building accounts. Yeah, it was really, really missing. And I guess from a social point of view as well, although I went to lots of clubs and, I socialized with other mums. I felt like I'd lost my identity. I felt like I was just a mum and a wife, and I needed to be more than that.
This isn't putting down mums and wives, because some people, that is their fulfillment and that's what they're after. And I think the other problem that, and I find even now, because I spend a lot of time working from home, what I enjoy is going out and being surrounded by people who are like-minded, who have that kind of drive and that, there's lots of stuff that, you just don't get that kind of feedback from. And I even find with friends nowadays, they're starting to take early retirement and all that kind of stuff. Work isn't a big priority to them. I think one of them listens to my podcast, so I better be careful what I say. But I'm still kind of out there growing businesses and, and really kind of enjoying that aspect. So it's really difficult to kind of switch off from it and not be surrounded by people that are like-minded.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it quite isolating in many ways. I just needed that sort of, I needed to keep my brain stimulated in a way that I'd always been used to. I think that for someone like myself, if I've got too much time on my hands, it's not good. I really need to be focused. And yeah, I definitely missed it. And many people said to me, they understood that the need to want to go back to work, and they understood the need for me to feel that I'd got an income and that as a single mum, I could support myself. But they were all saying to me, well, just go and get a job. Just, even if you just go and stack shelves. But it was never going to be enough. It would, I wouldn't just want to stack shelves. I'd want to do something else, or I'd want to introduce more things. I'm not great at working for other people. I knew that. I needed to do something for me.
I actually would say that I'd go as far as describe myself as unemployable now. I haven't worked for other people for, 20 years. And my workflow is very different from other people, and I work at different times of day, and, it's just, I don't think it would work at all. So I totally understand that. So we'd got to the point, you've got this cleaning company, you decided to base it around the needs of your parents, which I think is really clever, actually. So you've got your avatar, your kind of key avatar already made, and you're living with them kind of thing. So how did that progress?
Well, I started it from home. And I ran the kitchen table. So I decided that I would run the business around school times and making sure that I was always there to pick my children up from school and be available for them. So I did everything. I had this vision and I knew what I wanted. I wanted it to be affordable, reliable, and I wanted it to be efficient. And I did everything. I did everything from making sure that my branding was right. I used, I investigated chemical suppliers. I wanted it to be super, super professional. And I visited every single client first. I never did anything over the phone. I went to see them to give them that reassurance that they were dealing with a professional company. And it grew. It really, really grew. And I guess I chose cleaning because there's minimal startup costs. I didn't have any money to invest. And I knew that there wasn't a professional cleaning business in the area that was going to do it the way that I was going to do it. And then I started to get busier and busier in a way that I was woefully underprepared for. I guess I thought I would get clients, but I didn't realize just how quickly it would grow. People started to refer me to other people, and I needed to employ more people. And it snowballed in a way that I wasn't prepared for. And then you get swept along in it and you find yourself almost working backwards. So you're saying yes to things and you're taking on more work. And then you're realizing that actually I've got to make sure that my back end, my systems are there and my foundations are there. Myself and my ex-husband, we'd gone our separate ways. And I literally looked at the business and thought, I've got to do this full time. I can no longer do it part time. I've got to make sure that we've got an income. My husband had gone to Australia, so I couldn't play at it anymore. It wasn't a hobby. I'd got to make it work. I'll be honest with you, Robin, figures, I think I said this to you previously, figures are not my strong point. I suffer from number blindness, and I'm good at customer service, customer satisfaction. I'm good at planning a customer journey, and I'm good at sales, but I struggle around figures. I can't look at spreadsheets and balance sheets. It's not my zone of genius, as they say. So I decided that I needed some help, and I got myself an accountant. And she was someone that I knew, someone that I liked and trusted. And I thought, that's that done. I've outsourced that. I do not need to worry about that anymore. And all I could focus on was looking after my employees, making sure that I kept my customers happy, because my sole focus was, if I keep my customers happy, I've got an income coming in. If I've got happy customers, they tell other customers. And that, I'll be honest with you, that it was my real sort of focus. Everything else, figures, looking at my profit and loss, I didn't worry about. I thought, that's what I've got an accountant for. I know that's naive, but that's where I was.
I can totally see. Well, it's where a lot of companies are. And I coach in the construction industry. A lot of my clients say, oh, we can't do numbers. And it's about me finding a simple way for them to understand. Not because they're not intelligent, and please don't take it that way. It's because numbers aren't their thing. Their thing is working with their hands, is thinking about problems in a different way, firefighting. And I think the problem with getting someone like an accountant in to take over that role, and what sounds like happened to you, is you abdicated to them rather than delegated to them. So if you can delegate that role where they're feeding you back on a monthly basis, explaining everything to you and going through it so that you understand it, that's fine. If you go, I can't cope with that, I'm going to get someone in, and then you abdicate, you just let them get on with it, it's destined to fail. And it happens so many times in business, and so many different roles, people kind of get overwhelmed, they get, like you did, over busy, almost drowning, and they just go, we need someone, and they employ in panic. So they get someone, it's normally the wrong person, doing the wrong role, and they've abdicated to them, not delegated to them. And it's really, really important to get these systems in place so that they come in to run a system. So even with an accountant, you've got to be very clear about what they're doing and what they're not doing, and what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could not have put that better. And that's a really good way of looking at it. I didn't know the right questions to ask. I think there was that personal connection there. So I kind of trusted, and I'm not shifting the blame in any way, but I was spinning so many plates. I was tired. I was working in the evenings. I was being a mum. What I really wanted to do was go, do you know what? I know that's not what I'm good at. So yeah, I'm going to give that to someone else, and it's going to get taken care of. And that's exactly what I did. It was, there just weren't enough hours in my day trying to balance my work and my life. So I literally just concentrated on growing the business and keeping the money coming in.
Totally understand that. And I think, that really is very parallel with the kind of people that I work with. I haven't met very many that have a problem with finding work. And it's normally something what I cover with my clients, but, only when there's a demand. Normally, it's how to cope with the work they've got and actually stepping back and working on the business rather than just drowning in it. And we all get sucked into the whirlwind of the business and forget to work on it and plan.
So it got towards the end of 2015, and I had a meeting with my accountant, and she said to me, you've gone way over the VAT threshold. And I wasn't registered for VAT. And she did some rough calculations and worked out that I owed probably about 40 grand. I've gone quiet because I just remember sitting there and it not making sense. I was just like, well, how did I get here? How can I have started a business, worked this hard, and now All I wanted to do was provide for myself and my children, not go on benefits or just be secure. And suddenly I'm in debt by the tune of 40 odd thousand. Even now, my tummy's squirming at just remembering how I felt. And I just felt helpless. And I said to her, what do I do? What's the answer? And she said, well, you've got a couple of choices. You can either ignore it because they don't know yet. They're not chasing you. So you can either ignore it and you might get away with it, or you can try and work out a payment plan with them. And I came away from that meeting, and just from that moment onwards, it was like someone had poured cold water into my body. I just didn't know what to do. And logic told me that, HMRC were not stupid. They would catch up with me and they would come demanding their money, and rightly so. And I went through this whole, how could I have been so stupid? It's my fault. I hated myself. So after I drowned in and had my little pity party, I was like, right, okay, then I probably need to get some help here because I don't know what to do. So I went to see another accountant, and I sat down and I said to him, look, this is where I am. This is what's happened. And he said to me, it's really unlikely that you'll be allowed to pay this off in installments. He said, do you owe anybody else? And I said, no, I owe nothing. I have no one. I would never borrow money. I wouldn't do anything. And he said, well, the only thing you can do is to go bankrupt. And I was like, wow. Yeah, didn't see that coming at all. So he very kindly put me in touch with an insolvency practitioner who talked me through my options. And he said that I could go bankrupt and restart because my business model was good. I just needed to work a little bit smarter. So by this time, I was already figuring out that not everybody's got your best interest at heart. And I realized you can't trust everybody. So I got an appointment with another insolvency practitioner because it kind of sounded quite simple to stop and start again. And the second insolvency practitioner told me that I should forget running a business, that I should just go and be a cleaner and just work 40 hours a week as a cleaner and count my lucky stars that I was able to do that. I was even more confused by this time. And in the end, I had no choice but I couldn't sleep. The anxiety was so bad. And every morning when that bang of my letterbox went, I was like, this is it. This is the letter that's going to tell me that I owe them 40 odd thousand and they're going to come knocking on the door for it. And I just could not live like that. That is not how the impact of that on my health. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I couldn't tell anybody. The feelings of, I guess you'd describe it as shame. I'd brought all this on myself. I'd done it to myself, but through my own naivety, I was in this situation and I just felt isolated. I was snappy and irritable with my children, and that was not how I wanted to be. So in the end, I decided that bankruptcy was the only way forwards for me, that there just wasn't going to be another way out of it. So I used my new accountant. He very kindly guided me through the process, and we planned it. We booked my day. And then I figured out I had 2 weeks to prepare. And I was like, damn, I need to start telling people. I need to tell my parents. So I went to see my mum and dad, probably one of the worst days of my life, sat them down and said, this is what's happened. This is where I am. My mum, will it be in the local papers? Will everybody know? It's like, whoa, I hadn't even thought about that. Guess so. My dad was much more pragmatic and said to me, well, you've done it. You can just fight. You've just got to get yourself through it. I told a few close friends. I told a couple of people that I thought were friends who no longer wanted anything more to do with me.
Oh, I had a couple of those. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Where people find out and then suddenly they just cut all ties. When you said, I think you described it as cold water being poured inside your body, that's the kind of feeling that you get when you realise it's all going to happen. And the thing is, as a business owner, you've got to get up every day and make it happen. So not not to win, but to close the company down. And if you don't do that, particularly in my situation, other people were going to suffer. So I had to go to meetings, I had to carry on functioning. Whereas I really just wanted to either stay in bed or get as far away as possible. And, it really, talk about stress affecting your body. It really, really does. And for kind of, when I had it happen to me, at the end of the day, I spent the first year blaming everyone else. And then the second to third year, I realised my role in it. But it took a couple of years to stop that effect, where someone turned up at the house, or, as you say, a letter came through the letterbox, and I just was on tenterhooks. In that 2 years, debts came out of the woodwork, things that we'd done in the past came back to haunt us, all kinds of things happened. And when I see a situation, when I see life now, it's so different. It is so, so different. So, I think that the stress it does put upon you. But I was very lucky. I had a mechanic I knew. I remember taking one of my cars down, because I got rid of my 2 cars we had that were kind of quite nice. We had another car. And I went down to see him just because I had a small problem with it. And he went, listen, I've been through this. I went bust. He said, it's going to take at least a year. It's going to be a really shit year. You have to accept that, and then you're going to be fine. He said, and can I help you at all in the meantime? I said, well, I don't know. I said, I've only got this car, don't know what my wife's going to do. And he said, well, I'll lend you a car for the year. So he also lent me a car for the year. And unfortunately, he's passed away since. But his words, I don't think he'll ever know how much he helped me. Not just giving me the car for free, but also, with what he'd said. And I think often in life, you can be really influential on someone's life.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There were times when it's one of those really weird situations. I'm much further down the line now, but it's like I tell people about it because I don't want people to find out and think that I haven't told them. I'm always quite open about it. And at the time, with friends and things like that, I lost people that I thought were friends, but also there were people that I didn't know that well who actually just turned up and went, do you need anything? Do you need some shopping, or can we do anything? Do you need us to look after the children? And yeah, like you, there were 1 or 2 people who literally just came up and hugged me. That for me, even now thinking about it makes me really emotional. I'd isolated myself a little bit because I knew what was coming. I hadn't felt able to tell that many people. I'm still processing and dealing with it myself. And I felt that, I didn't want to broadcast it. So when I eventually did tell people, just to have someone come and give me a hug meant the world. But I also found myself, there were a lot of people that had been through it as well, which really surprised me, because it's like there is a big stigma attached to it. And I found myself being part of a club that I didn't even know existed. This club of people that had gone through a similar experience and had lived to tell the tale. Then there were people in this, there were people that and they understood, and there was never any judgment. I discovered that there were people who gone bankrupt and had done it maybe 3 or 4 times and were really blasé about it. And I remember looking at them and thinking, wow, once is absolutely life-changing. I wouldn't wish the whole process on anybody, yet alone doing it 2 or 3 times. I don't get that, I'll be honest, but...
No, I totally understand that. And I think, kind of, how do I put this? I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. If you haven't gone bust, if you haven't totally failed, you've still got a lot to learn. And often, I ran a business after we went bust. I now coach. And I have the odd person say to me, well, you're a failure. How can you coach? Well, it's just a particular set of circumstances that brought me to coaching and mentoring people. I mean, normally I'd just be running a company. I was running a company quite happily, but moved over to this, which is a rarity. I think most people would still just be running their company. But also, the reason I'm able to be good at what I do, and I really believe I am good at what I do, is because I've failed. And that failure, as side by side with the successes I had, It's really made me a much more rounded person and been able to advise people and understand what it feels like when things aren't going right.
Yeah, I think those people that have not experienced some kind of failure before success, I just think it makes them more humble. It makes them certainly more appreciative. We all experience terrible situations in our life, but I think it's how we deal with them that makes us who we are. I always say to people, I'm not proud of what happened. I wish it hadn't. I totally own it. I know that, I could have done something about it. However, I am proud of how I dealt with it. And I am proud of what's happened since. I'm enormously proud. And I'm proud of the impact that it's had on me. I would not be the person I am today if I hadn't experienced that. So in a very weird kind of way, I am grateful that I've been through it.
I'm very grateful I've been through it. I wouldn't choose to go through it, but I'm very grateful because it's brought me to do what I do now. And I really enjoyed development. I love building houses. Was never as keen on contracting, but I really loved. There was something, that you were creating something. But I equally enjoy what I do now, which is coaching. I would never have done it without the failure. Because I was running a family company, no way would I have kind of left that to do this. So, that's been quite special in my life. And when I say that, it was the worst experience of my life. And I used to say, well, I haven't lost a parent. Having now lost my father, who was my best mate, my mentor, my everything in lots of ways, going bust was still the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And I'm not belittling losing my father because I was devastated. But going bust, I had to get up every day. I had to sort things out. I had to do things that were really difficult. And I had to protect my father from it because he was, it was his company, it was his baby. And I felt really guilty about that. When he died, he kind of was to the point in life where I think he didn't particularly was getting what he wanted out of life. And he went when he wanted to go, really. Yes, I had to organise a funeral, I had to do lots of other things, and there was lots of other complications. My sister was on life support at the same time and all kinds of things. But I could deal with that because I could only do so much. I could do what I could do.
Yeah, I hear you. I lost my dad last March, so just over a year ago. And yes, whilst I would give my arm, my leg, anything to have him back for an hour, for a day. One of the things I am most grateful for is that he lived long enough to see me turn my failure into a success. And he wasn't a man that was given to much emotion. You were old school, I think is probably the word. One of the last things he said to me was that he was so proud I turned it round. And I am so grateful that he got to see that, because that means the world to me that he saw that. Because by the time he passed away, I had sold my business, I'd rebuilt it, I'd sold it, and I had retrained as a coach. And funnily enough, somebody said to me the other day when I was in the midst of a coaching session that what sets me apart from everybody else is my passion. And they said to me, why are you so passionate? And I said, because I've been through your journey. I've been through the highs and lows of running a cleaning business, the trials and tribulations. And I am absolutely committed, dedicated, passionate about you taking your business and growing it to give you the life you want, because that's exactly where I started. Yes, I messed it up. Yes, I learned from it. And I'll do everything in my power to make sure that you don't repeat the mistakes that I made. So, yeah, to me, he said, you can't, I wish I could bottle the Janet Nash passion. So, yeah, I guess that's a bit of a compliment. And I think that's part of the reason why I do what I do now.
I had one of my clients, I coach teams as well. And I really enjoy that because the dynamic is really interesting. Though it can be quite, I won't call it stressful, but it can be interesting when people kind of, offload for the first time. But one of my clients said to me, "You're not a business coach." And I thought, "Oh, here it comes." You're a counsellor. So we've touched on the fact what you went on to do. So perhaps we've talked about the failure. and how that made you feel. So what happened after failure? So what's happened then?
I actually went bankrupt 1st of February 2016, went to court, wasn't sure what to expect. And this will make you laugh. This is how naive I actually was. Went to court and it was a little bit early, shaking like a leaf. I had a friend with me and I said, let's go and get a cup of tea. I went over to the little cafeteria and the tea was 30p. This is going to sound so silly. And I looked at this lady that was serving the teas and coffees and I said, I can't remember the last time I've bought a cup of tea for 30p. Why is it so cheap? She just pointed to the sign above her head that said insolvency in court, bankruptcy. And that penny dropped and I was like, whoa. That kind of like gallows humor where even in the darkest situation, you can find a little bit of humor. And she just looked at me. She said, don't worry, you won't be the first. Everybody says it. Slow, right? Okay. I felt like I'd been inducted into this new way of life that I was going to have to learn. So I had to, the very same day that I went bankrupt, I came back to my office to find 2 insolvency practitioners arrived to close me down. Fortunately for me, with my offices, my landlord stood by me and said I'd been an excellent tenant and he was happy to continue to lease my offices. All my staff agreed to stick by me. And I borrowed £200 off my close friend and I was able to buy my stock back. They did write to all my clients. They took everything. They took all my files. They took my credit cards. I had to empty my purse in front of them. At one point, I went to the toilet and one of them came and stood outside. I don't know what they thought I was going to do. And I got to know them incredibly well because you spend the next year. It's a bit like being on license. If I liken it to a criminal, you spend the next year where they assess how well you're doing and if you can afford to pay anything back. So I got to know them incredibly well. And they made me an appointment for a month's time and told me I had to go and make a full statement and take me through the process. And when I went to do that, the same thing happened. You go into their offices and you go through security. You can't go to the toilet without being attended. Yeah, I've not got a criminal record, but I certainly felt like a criminal that day. However, by the end of the day, when I'd given my full statement, they were incredibly kind. There was a box of tissues there. And one of them said to me, I think that the phrase he used was, your accountant did a right number on you and we wish you well for next time. So after the year was up, I spent that whole year living on eggshells because you get your phone call from them every month. But I also spent that year rebuilding my confidence. I learned everything I could. I knew I had a good business model and I knew I could do it. I just needed to work a little bit smarter, I guess, and maybe not as hard. There were a few clients that were embarrassed and didn't want to deal with me. I mean, there were lots that stuck by me. There were tenders that I couldn't go for because you have to reveal if you've had any financial issues. Obviously, you can't get any kind of credit. I had to pay everything up front, phone bills, insurances, everything. So I was kind of like, well, I'm at rock bottom. So the only thing I can do now is I can't actually go any lower. So I might as well go up. And I literally was determined that everything I did was going to build me back again. I got a really good business mentor and a coach, and I just invested in myself. I studied, I worked hard. And after the first year was over, they called me and said that I would be on their register for 6 years. But to all intents and purposes, my bankruptcy period was over. And I was ready to go. I put everything I learned into practice in the business. And within 2 years, the profit had trebled. It was absolutely soaring. I'd gone into construction, I'd gone into commercial, and then I ended up in biohazard cleaning, which was the margins in that were amazing. But also it was it's a real niche specialist area. I started to win awards. I won a number of awards for best service, best cleaning business, training, best employer. And yeah, I just made a promise to myself that I would never be ashamed of what had happened to me. I just was not going to hide it. And I started to sleep better. I think once you get to that lowest point and you realize that nothing is ever going to be quite that bad again, that there's almost this, well, it can't get any worse. So logic says it's got to get better. And it did. It started to get better. So by 2020, my dad had started to get quite poorly. And I decided that I wanted to sell, just wanted to have a bit more free time to spend with him. And a big corporate company came along within a matter of weeks of putting my business up for sale. Corporate came along and bought it. That's when I decided I was going to retrain as a coach, and I was going to help other business owners not make the mistakes that I'd made. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
So you, when we started, I said the fact that you'd made the national newspapers. How did that come about?
I'm not going to take credit and say that I planned it. I didn't. I got an inquiry. I was still getting huge amounts of referrals. I had a wait list of people that wanted to work with me. And I got an inquiry from a housing association. And in fact, the guy asked if he could come and see me, which was quite rare because normally I would go and see clients. Anyway, he came to see me and he explained the difficulties that they'd got in terms of they'd got properties that were hoarded, that had evictions. They were properties that had got needles in, that had got all the grotty stuff in life that, we don't always realize is out there. And they wanted to work with a company that could provide this really niche service. And I said, yep, let me look into that for you. So I did. I looked into it and I realized that there was no one else in my area doing it. And I thought, I can do this. I'll do it. And always, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it properly. I got myself trained. I went on a couple of training courses and realized the massive potential that there was. And I got the contract with the housing association, and that just snowballed. Once people realized that I was trained and we were doing all this specialist work, the work started to come in from everywhere. And I guess what got me into the papers is that back in 2020, it's much more widely known now, but it's quite rare for a female to have that specialist type of business. But also, people don't realize I was hugely naive in the way in which people were living. Some of the people we were dealing with had just fallen by the wayside in life. They'd either had no support network, or they were suffering from PTSD, or they'd been triggered by something traumatic in their life, and they were living in the most appalling circumstances. I was in for a really huge awakening and in the way that people were living. And I think part of what made it easier for me was the fact that I don't think I've ever judged, but certainly when you've been bankrupt, you don't judge anybody. It can happen to anybody. We can all slip through the cracks in life. And I used to think to myself, well, there, but for the grace of God, it could happen to any one of us. And I think that's what made the difference, is that I was able to build really good relationships, because people are naturally suspicious of any kind of intervention. And I could build a relationship where people would let us in. They would let us into their homes that were hoarded, or they trusted me. And that went hugely in my favor. And so I then trained my team. And, we saw some terrible things. When you've gone to a property and there's been a young person who has committed suicide by shotgun, to be able to do that kind of work and do it sensitively and do it ethically, I felt lucky to be able to have been chosen to do that. And everything I did, I made sure that we were compassionate, really compassionate. So yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up in the paper. Got a call one day asking me if I would be interested in talking about my experiences. And that's how it happened.
So just to kind of round it off, and I think it's been a really, really interesting chat, by the way. If you had to have 3 bits of advice you'd give to yourself before you started your first business, or you now give to your clients before they start a business? We'll just keep it to 3, because I know I could do a list of 20. What do you think are the top 3 bits of advice?
The advice I give to my clients is probably, I'd probably say the 3 things that I learned, because my advice that I give to clients comes at different stages as they develop. But I guess for me, the 3 things that I learned that would stand out the most is, sad as it is to say it, not everyone has your best interest at heart. Trust your own judgment, trust your gut instinct, trust yourself first. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be, it's never about how hard you work. It's about working smarter. Having those systems and having those foundations in place, work smarter. I was working incredibly hard and still ended up 40 grand in debt. So definitely work smarter. And I think the third thing, probably the most important thing, is it doesn't matter if you're the CEO, doesn't matter if you're a solo entrepreneur. Businesses are run on data, they're run on numbers. And, don't be frightened of numbers, which really resonated with what you were saying earlier. I outsourced that because it wasn't my zone of genius, and I still outsource it. But what I know now is I know enough of the right questions to ask to know that it's being done properly. And I guess I know my critical numbers. I know my profit I make. I know what it costs to run my business. I know the critical numbers. So I still think it's absolutely fine to outsource things if you're not good at them, but you've still got an obligation to educate yourself. And there's plenty of help out there to, you've got to have your finger on the pulse with your numbers. So definitely know your numbers. Doesn't mean you have to do them, but you have to know them.
I mean, I've said this on my podcast before, but my kind of take on it is trust is not enough. So you've got to have checks and balances in place. And if you trust someone, they trust you, they won't mind you having checks and balances in place. Now, the second someone goes, I'm not happy about that, you don't trust me, people can't jeopardise what you're trying to build as a business. So I'm sure that will be sorted out. So that's really good. So, well, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. I think for me, the one thing that I really wanted to get out of today is if I help one person by talking about my experiences, whether they're going through it, been through it, however it's affected them, then that makes me incredibly happy because, as you said, it's not something we choose. It's not an easy option. It wasn't a quick win. However, like I say, not proud of how I got there, but proud of how I dealt with it. So if that helps one person, job done for me by sharing my story.
Well, that's why I started this podcast. It's not sponsored, it's not monetized in any way. It's there to help people. So it's a resource for people that are either going through this or don't want to go through this. And honestly, it's a lot easier to learn by other people's mistakes.
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Thanks a lot, Janet. That was really nice to speak to you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Bust and Beyond with Robin Hayhurst. Be sure to tune in next time and visit his website at robinhayhurst.com.